very much for joining us. Oh, I can hear that it's being recorded. That's good. It's a good sign. It's our annual Pupillage Webinar, that time of year again. And I personally love this time of year because it always reminds me how fortunate we are, how lucky we are to do this job. It can be quite stressful, particularly on the run up to Christmas. And so whenever I have cause to sit down and start planning for next round of interviews, it always strikes me how many people are out there who want to do this job, who are desperate to do it. And I hope that you'll, in the next hour, take at least a few useful points away about pupillage generally, but certainly about applying to St. John's specifically. We've got a great panel. I can see 5 happy smiley faces looking at me. Well, 4 in Natasha. And what I'd like to do to start with is ask everyone to introduce themselves. Why don't we start with you, Rachel?
Hello, my name's Rachel Segal. I am a barrister in the personal injury and clinical negligence teams at St. John's. I was an academic for 17 years before I retrained to be a barrister. I was a musicologist at the University of Leeds and the Royal College of Music, and then working in higher education policy before retraining. Really happy that I did retrain, because although I loved what I was doing before, I also love what I'm doing now. And I started pupillage at St. John's in 2016 and became a tenant in 2017.
And now you're a member of our pupillage committee.
I am.
I'm the pupillage interviewer. Indeed,
yeah. I've done quite a few pupillage interviews now, got quite a few of those under my belt at different rounds. And very happy to be on the committee and happy to be here for this webinar.
How about you, Julia?
These kind of sessions always make me feel a bit old these days, because I look back at quite how long I've been at St. John's. I had a much more traditional route into the bar than Rachel, in that I read law at Cambridge, then went straight on to do back what was in the early part of this century, the bar vocational course at what was then the Inns of Court School of Law. They've all been rebranded. And then I came to St. John's in 2002 to do my pupillage, and I've been a tenant since 2003. I've always practiced in family law. Initially, I did both children work and money work. Now I specialise purely in children work. I'm also on the Pupillage committee. I'm deputy head of Pupillage, which means I have to do what Ben tells me to do. And I think that, and I'm also a pupil supervisor as well. There we go.
Okay, so we've had someone from personal injury and someone from family. How about someone from Chancery and commercial? Natasha.
So I followed the fairly traditional route. So I did an undergraduate degree in law and then went on straight to do the BBC. I then went to work for a law firm in personal injury and insurance for about a year. Then I went to do a master's in international commercial law. Then I worked as a county court advocate for a couple of years or so until I got pupillage. So I did pupillage 2015 to 2016 at St. John's, and I've been here since.
And you're also on the pupillage committee now?
I am. I'm on the pupillage committee and deputy head of the commercial team as well. So my practice is around half commercial, and then the rest is contentious probate and property disputes.
Great. Kate?
Hello, so I'm Kate. I practice in the family team. I've been at St. John's since I started pupillage in October 2019. So I've been a tenant now for just over a year. I followed a fairly traditional route as well. So I did my undergraduate in law. I had a year out to kind of research things like scholarships, the BPTC. I did quite a few mini pupillages in that year, and also spent a bit of time just working and traveling as well before doing the BPTC. And the pupillage experience is fairly fresh in my mind because I've been at St. John's for 2 years now. So most of my pupillage was also during the pandemic, which gave it an interesting slant.
That'll teach you resilience. Remember traveling? Oh. And then finally, last but not least, Vivien.
Yes, hello, my name's Vivien. I am the current family pupil at St John's, and I have a slightly unorthodox route to the bar, similar in a way to Rachel. So I had a career previously. And I also did an English degree when I first went to university. So I did an English degree, and then I trained and qualified and worked for a few years as a teacher in state and private schools. And I decided teaching wasn't for me, and so I requalified, did the GDL, did the BPTC, got some scholarships along the way to help me fund it, and then worked for a company doing county court advocacy work in between getting my pupillage. And I also did a sort of an LLM at BPP University.
And now we've got you.
And now you have me.
Great. All right. Well, everyone who's attending, I should say, we can't see or hear you, but we have got at the bottom of your screen a Q&A option. So if you click on that, you should be able to type questions for us. We've had a few in advance, so thank you for those. But yeah, if you want to ask us anything or anything springs to mind, do let us know. There's also going to be a quick survey at the end of this. I'm told it's quick. And I've also been asked to beg you really, to complete those if you don't mind. Some headlines from the very start, because this is about St John's Pupillage. The dates, our application form has gone on the website now. I've seen that today. You can download that now and start completing it. Lucky you. We can start sending those to us on the 5th of January at 11 AM. And you can do that until 2 PM on the 9th of Feb. And we've decided we're going to do interviews, first round on the 26th of March and second round on the 9th of April. We're not allowed to make any offers or give you any hints until the 6th of May. Your first port of call for anything pupillage related for St John's should be the pupillage policy, which is on our website. I spent ages drafting that, and I take it as a personal affront that basically no one wants to read it. But you will find loads of information about our process, exactly what to expect from applications and interviews, all set out in writing. So have a look there. Before we get into the meat of this, I'm really interested, Viv, in hearing from you first, because you started in October, didn't you?
I did, yes. Has he frozen?
I think he has. Maybe he wants to know about the application process from your point of view, having gone through. Oh, Ben, you're back. What did you want Viv to talk about?
Yeah.
Viv, I was asking, how's it going?
It's really, really good. I'm absolutely loving it. I really am. The team are I can only speak for the family team, but my other co-pupils also enjoying it. But my experience, supervisors are very supportive. Feedback is good and continuous, and the work is varied and challenging.
When is it that you applied for pupillage then?
So I applied, would it be 2 years ago, yeah. So I had the year in between applying and being offered pupillage. That's when I worked for county court work.
Is that what you were doing in the year in between, after you found out that you had pupillage?
Yeah, so I did that, and I also did the LLM at BPP, which I did a special module on family law. I wrote a dissertation on divorce law to help prepare me for pupillage. It filled in some time and it gave me a qualification, and you know, why not? Yeah, so it was a mixture of that, and then some work for LPC law, for the advocacy company. And but I mean, that was quite challenging in itself, because that was during lockdown. So for quite a long time, all the courts shut. So, and everything then went remote that way as well. So I learned how to do telephone hearings, and I learned how to do virtual hearings, and I understood how all of that worked, which actually was a huge bonus and really good experience.
I can see how valuable that was.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you now wish you'd known, having, you're what, 2 months into pupillage?
Yeah.
Is there anything you've learned since you started that you wish you knew before?
That's a good question. I think I did anticipate pupillage being quite scary. And I did anticipate it being, I felt like I'd be intimidated in chambers because everybody's a barrister and I want to be a barrister. And I don't have that sensation at all. And being able to let that go, that expectation of something, it has meant that I'm able to enjoy this process a lot more. So yeah, but I mean, that's very difficult to say when you're looking at starting pupillage and not being frightened of it, because it is quite a daunting prospect.
Are you saying we're not as scary as you thought we would be?
That's precisely what I'm saying, Ben.
Kate, you did pupillage last year, as you said, in the middle of lockdown. How was that? I'm really interested to hear about that.
Yeah, it was certainly interesting. So my second six started on the 1st of April 2020, as people were starting a mass exodus from the office, from chambers. So suddenly I was back at home in my room, kind of working out how to do court hearings, but it all obviously being remote. And there were times where it was really challenging. I think what I learned from it and what I found to be the biggest saviour in it all is the amount of support that I got, even despite the fact that I wasn't just able to stroll around chambers and see who was around and quickly ask a question, as you would have been able to do if we were all working more normally. Everyone was really generous with their time, even though, I mean, obviously me ringing people at all hours, trying to get help when I was kind of not sure of myself yet. Everyone was really, really helpful, really supportive. And I think it was then more than any other time where I really realised that I'd made the right choice with St John's, because it was just, yeah, a huge relief to know that I had this network of people around me who could help me whenever I needed it.
So some positives out of what could have been quite a difficult time.
Yeah, definitely.
You've been in practice for a while now. So
Yeah.
What do you wish you'd known in pupillage that you know now?
I think looking back at the whole pupillage experience, again, like Viv said, it's easy to say this with hindsight, but I think in my first six, I probably could have been more confident in just making mistakes, asking questions that I might have thought in my head were really silly questions, and treating it as just a learning experience where I could absorb as much as I possibly could without the risk of getting anything wrong or having any real responsibility myself, because I was obviously under the tutelage of my supervisors, and they were the ones who I was shadowing and doing work for. So I think if I could do it all again, I would immerse myself so much more confidently in that first chunk, because the more you get out of that, the better it places you for starting second six.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, let's talk a bit about our process. At St John's, we do written applications and then 2, rarely 3 rounds of interviews. And through that process, about 200-ish applicants go down to 20 for first round interviews and then 9 normally for second round. In terms of written applications, Rachel, why don't you tell us a bit, to put you on the spot, about what kind of things we look for in the written applications? What kind of things are we assessing?
Sure, happy to do that. And actually that links into one of the questions that has been asked of the panel. And the question is to do with, let's focus on that first. There's somebody who, first of all, is interested in both the commercial and Chancery and the PI pupillages. They're both interested in both areas of law. So the first question, and I know this isn't quite on point, Ben, but is there an option during pupillage to undertake both PI Clin-Neg and commercial and Chancery work during pupillage? My response to that is realistically, no. There's nothing that formally precludes it, but realistically, no, simply because the way that at St John's we run our pupillages is that the pupils get a chance to specialise from day one within a particular team, and there's so many different areas and fields of practice within each team that there is such huge scope that it would just become too big for any one pupil to try to do both at the same time. So realistically, you'd need to pin your colours to the mast and decide which of those you are more interested in, or that you would want to pursue in pupillage and then on in practice, as far as you're able to tell. Back closer to being on point to the question that Ben raised is really the second part of the question, which is, how can a candidate best demonstrate an interest in a particular area? And of course, and now it's just disappeared, so I don't know where it's gone to. It looks like answered. There we go. How can the candidate best demonstrate an interest in a particular area of law if they don't have experience in it or only have a small amount? And it's being asked for the purpose of an application, because it says, I do realise at this stage people are not necessarily expected to know precisely what they want to do in the future or to have a ton of experience. Thank you. Yes, that's a really, really good question, and it's absolutely central to the way in which you need to approach the application process. The first thing that I would say that would help you is to remember that that first paper application is a form of written advocacy. And we all know how difficult it is to answer these questions in the word limits that you're given. But there's a very good reason why those word limits are provided, not least because we end up reading hundreds of these things and it takes an awfully long time. But also it gives you a really good opportunity to get used to drafting, redrafting, and then frankly redrafting again the answers that you give to the questions that are raised. And as Ben said, all those questions are available and up on our website, so we're completely transparent about the process. As far as the demonstrating an interest in a particular area of law, even if you don't have experience in it, that's fine, but there will be particular reasons why you have a particular interest or are drawn to a certain area of law. And what we'd be interested in is seeing what the reasons are for your interest, but in particular, how well you articulate those reasons, how well you make a case for being somebody that we think, oh yeah, clearly they do have a genuine interest, and clearly this is a person that we would want to know more about. And so you are more likely in those circumstances to be invited for interview. So there isn't an obvious magic bullet as such, but you have to think about the ways in which somebody who's never met you before, who doesn't see obvious areas of expertise or experience in a particular field, which of course is going to be most people, how you're going to be able to show that you do have a genuine interest. As I say, the way you articulate that's important, but you can also look at the way in which your actual experience in other areas of life, whether it be in work experience or pro bono work you might have done, or volunteer work, or a variety of different interests that you might have, how the sort of transferable skills that arise and are necessary for those activities might be articulated in such a way as you can show that they're relevant to the practice of the particular field that you're interested in. So it could be people skills related, it could be to do with generic things like time management or organizational skills, or having to deal with large amounts of information and working out how to problem solve. I mean, there could be a whole range of things. So it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily a barrier to your success if you say, I'd like to do personal injury and clinical negligence work, but I have no direct work experience in that field. That doesn't necessarily tank anything. All you have to do is make sure that you properly articulate why it's an area of interest for you and why it's something that you want to pursue. So I hope that's kind of partly at least started to answer the question that was asked, and thank you for that question. It's a very helpful one.
Thanks, Rachel. We're often asked about whether it matters the school or the university people went to. Julia, why don't you talk about that?
Sure. As part of our aim to be as neutral in our application process as we can, we actually anonymize a lot of the basic information that we receive. We anonymize your name. You're just given a number when we first get your form, and we only discover your names once we've selected who we're going to invite to interview. And then you suddenly discover that candidate number 84 is this young woman called Kate Pearson. And we also anonymise your school, your university, because we're conscious that it's not for us to take decisions about, for instance, whether a 2-1 from one university is better than a 2-1 from another university. So the bottom line is, whichever university you're at, obviously at the risk of sounding patronising, work as hard as you can to get the best grades you can, because we are interested in your academic ability, but don't get hung up on, did I go to the right university? There isn't a right university for the bar, there's the right university for you. Hopefully you're at it, you'll do well, and then you'll be able to write an impressive application form.
I'm sort of loath to ask this, but where did everyone go to uni?
I am very traditional. I'm afraid I am Cambridge,
Ah.
but I went to a state school. I went to a state school, so you can't despise me that much, Ben.
No, not at all. I went to state school. I went to Manchester Uni. Where did you go, Rachel?
I'm gonna sound really. I went to lots of universities. So I went to a state school. I went to a state school in Liverpool, and I've been to. I went to Leeds Uni, to Liverpool University, Plymouth University, Nottingham Law School, Oxford University, and Newcastle University.
Oh, you're embarrassing us. Kate,
you did ask.
Kate, bring me back down to earth.
So I went to a state grammar school in Plymouth. So I'm from the southwest originally. I then went to Oxford for my undergrad, and I did the BPTC up in Leeds. So whole width of the country.
Viv?
So I went to a state grammar, and then I got a music scholarship and went to an independent secondary school for sixth form. And then I went to the University of Exeter. And then I went to Canterbury Christchurch University to do my teaching. And then where did I do? University of Law and BPP.
Natasha?
So state school, University of Hull and University of Nottingham.
Oh, wow. So I think we've got a full house of state school presenters here. Interesting. Okay. As Julia says, we redact, so we won't know what school or uni you went to. For better or worse, that's the decision we've made. We think it's the right decision. We're often asked about whether grades make a difference. Firsts and 2-1s are good, but it doesn't make a huge difference. There's 1 point between them out of an available 28, I think, on the written applications. So it doesn't make a huge difference. The minimum we ask for is a 2-2. But if you have a 2-2 and you had some mitigating circumstances, it'll be treated almost like a 2-1. So don't get too hung up on grades. You know, there's a lot of areas to score on. Many pupillages. How many did everyone do? Viv, how many did you do?
I did loads.
Loads, that's good enough.
But the reason I did loads was because coming at it as a career change, I wanted to be certain what I wanted to do. And the only way I could do that was to look. And so I think I did pretty much every area of law I went to go and have a look at. Some I did more than family. I did lots of many pupillages. But yeah, it was the only way that I could be certain I was picking the right thing for me. And the other thing I did a little bit of was marshalling as well, which was quite insightful.
Sorry if everyone's distracted here. I've got a dog very insistently trying to get me to play with him. I'm trying to keep him out of shot. Natasha, how many minis did you do?
So I did a few. I did some in general common law because I wasn't sure. I knew that I wanted to do commercial. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do anything other than commercial, but I also thought that I should have a backup option and was trying to work out what that might be. For the most part, I discovered that I didn't really like anything else. Didn't mind Chancery, and commercial was often coupled with Chancery, so I ended up doing commercial and Chancery. But pre-COVID, I would have said that generally most places seem to be looking for you to have about 3 minis under your belt to show that you're interested in a particular area. So 3 minis, for example, in commercial and Chancery, if that's what you're applying for. I think now it's a bit different because of COVID, obviously.
Yeah.
But I do think if you can do a mini, whether it is the usual structure of you going into the set or whether they've got something else available, it's definitely worth doing to try and find out more about different areas.
You make a really good point about the sort of availability or lack of availability of minis. Certainly the way we approached it last year was that attendance at something like this, it's worth mentioning that on your forms, because while it's so hard to get minis at the moment, still more difficult than it was pre-pandemic for sure, and it's probably going to get harder again given the way the news is going. Attendance at things like this will be counted, will score in your favour slightly. In terms of work experience, from your intros, I got a sense that there's a bit of a range in terms of people's different routes to the bar. I mean, I know mine was basically uni, bar school, and into the job. Rachel, you're the complete opposite end of the spectrum, with 10 unis under your belt. Did anyone else have a sort of different experience? What was anyone else coming at it differently again?
And I had very limited work experience. I mean, I'm not going to say that I came from an impoverished background, but we didn't have a huge amount of money. I had to work all of my holidays doing fairly menial jobs, data entry, working in shops, that kind of thing. So I had very limited work experience. And again, don't think that that is a bar to the bar. Make the most of what you do. I think I did 2 or 3 mini pupillages, but I made sure I squeezed out of them what I could. So I did 2 general common law ones and specifically requested that I was doing a different area of law every day to see as much as I could. And then I did 1 pure family one by the time I knew that I was really interested in family. And so if you're in that situation, which I appreciate plenty of you may well be, just be creative. And as I say, use the time that you've got as well as you can, because we can't all afford to take weeks and weeks off. Particularly, we're all conscious how high university tuition fees are now. They were a mere £1,000 a year back in my day. So you have all of my sympathy on that front.
Rachel, you sort of touched on work experience, but it's probably worth saying that in terms of our mark structure, we look at work experience that's paid, unpaid, charity work, all of that in the round. That's one thing. So if you haven't come from some high-flying job as a solicitor, you don't need to worry about that. You just need to think about other ways that you've shown responsibility and leadership and whatever else it may be.
Yeah.
So that probably leads into this question, Viv, about how you found opportunities for county court advocacy. You did LPC, did you say?
I did, yeah. So I did LPC law. And the reason I picked that one, there was a number of reasons, but I liked the variety of law that they did. And the pay was, I'm not going to class it as good, but it was better than some of the other providers out there. And there's another one that you can get purely PI county court work. I can't remember the name of it now. It's just
it's Quest. I don't know whether they've branched out and they're doing other areas of law as well, but I worked for 2 county court advocacy agencies before I started Pupillage. There is no doubt in my mind that gave me confidence at interview that I didn't have the first time round, for sure. I mean, I had work experience, life experience, and academics coming out my ears, but that didn't alter the fact that it was only on the 3rd round of applications that I was successful in being offered pupillage. And I know plenty of people for whom it took 3 years, 4 years, and in one case in particular 5 years, and that person is an extremely successful practitioner right now. So don't worry about that, but I'm absolutely sure that the advocacy exercise element in particular of the interviews that I did, and I made very few applications. I was really selective and the numbers were very low of the ones that I applied to. But where there was any advocacy involved, oh my goodness, that experience of dealing with grumpy, overworked judges who haven't read the papers and having to do last minute prep on very poorly prepared briefs, you know, for often for peanuts and in large volume, was absolutely invaluable. I mean, you know, that's so anyway, so the two agencies I worked for were Quest. I worked for them for 2 years, and then for the second year, and I'd agreed this with both of them, so that I was upfront about the fact that I wanted to work for both at the same time, was LPC. Now, Quest only was doing personal injury then. So for those of you who want to do personal injury, clinical negligence, who just want to get experience in PI, it is, you can't beat it really, going to Quest. And they're a really lovely a bunch of people to work for. It's headed up by a couple of solicitors, and they're very good. They really know their stuff, and they give good training. They don't generally pay as much as LPC, but you know, there are ways of balancing things out so that you can afford to live on what you earn across the two, because that's what I ended up doing. LPC, you get a wider range of work, enforcement actions, if that means anything to you,
Not me.
and various applications. So it's really great.
I want to rattle through some of the questions that we've got here. One of the questions was asking whether people who have an interest in areas of law that aren't in our core areas, i.e. this example is public law rather than our core areas of family, chancery and commercial, personal injury and clinical negligence, whether they need not apply effectively. And the answer to that is no, of course not. All of our areas of law come under one of our cores. So public law is probably under our chancery and commercial umbrella. I'm looking at Natasha to nod at me, hopefully.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Yeah, sounds right. So no, all of the sort of sub areas come under one of those three main umbrellas. So no, that's not a bar to you.
I mean, we had someone before who had applied on the basis that they wanted to do planning, and they were taken on to do planning. So
yeah, we get applications sometimes from people who want to do crime, and we don't do crime. So that would be a mistake. But as long as it's on one of our, as long as it's on the website, you're okay. We were asked about how an LLM is treated in the application process and whether there's a point allocated for that. So that would be like your post-grad. And the answer to that is that you get a maximum of 4 points for your academics, and you get that several different ways. One would be to get a first undergrad. If you get a first undergrad, you've got 4 points. You can't go higher. Another way would be if you got a 2-1 undergrad but went on to do well in a post-grad. So if you did an LLM and you got a distinction, that might bump you up to a 4. So the only reason you would do post-grad training in terms of coming to St. John's would be if you sort of underperformed at undergrad and you wanted to try and rectify that. But it's a big cost and a time commitment for not a huge difference in terms of points, because you might go from a 3 to a 4 and get 1 extra point, but you're probably not going to get more than that. So generally, I would say, unless you're really interested in doing it for your own reasons, don't do a postgrad or an LLM just because you want to do slightly better with St. John's written application form. Does anyone disagree with that?
No, I totally agree. I mean, I wouldn't say you're definitely better, but you are at least as well to try and get a job for a year or two in a local solicitor's office, particularly if that job is in an area that you're interested in, because you'll be getting real practical experience. You'll be having cases coming across your desk. If they know you've got a legal qualification, you'll probably be asked to do legal research and stuff. And that's actually, in some ways, more of the practical skills that you'll need.
Great, thanks.
Can I just like to say another thing actually in respect of the minis and the questions about that. Sometimes you can be in a position where you just can't afford to go and do a mini in a chambers that you want to work in. It might be because you can't afford the accommodation in London, or you might not be able to afford the train ticket that you need, or whatever it is. When Ben was talking about the work experience being looked at in the round, he really does mean that. And if there may well be things that you do in other paid work that might have nothing to do ostensibly with the law, but that could be really interesting to us and that would be relevant and useful, because again, it comes down to these transferable skills that you will then need as a barrister. So that's relevant as well. It's not, you don't always have to be somebody who is showing that you've done minis in the best in the best chambers. That there isn't a single formula for what we look at, but again, it's down to the quality of the written advocacy that you produce in that application form to sort of just set the scene.
Thanks, Rachel.
Sorry, just very briefly, just going back to the LLM question. I think for our purposes, for our applications, it doesn't make a huge difference, but I would say generally in commercial and chancery sets, so sets that particularly everyone practices commercial and chancery, it is very common to find that people have a master's. And part of that might be simply that they wanted to demonstrate that they had particular interest in certain sub areas of commercial and chancery. And part of it may well be just that they wanted to compensate for certain grades. But I wouldn't recommend undertaking a master's simply to get that extra point. It has to be a case of you're genuinely interested in doing it and you can afford to do it.
Yeah, of course. None of us are saying that education is bad. It's really good, but do it for your own reasons rather than just trying to impress us. We were asked whether people need to have completed their LLB before they apply. The answer to that is, well, it doesn't have to be an LLB, but undergrad, yes. In theory, I suppose we would consider an application from someone who hadn't, but they'd be losing out on so many marks in terms of the academics stage that they probably struggle to get through to interview, I'd have thought. Julia, does that sound right to you?
I mean, there's absolutely nothing to stop you applying while you are still doing your LLB, and clearly a very, very strong candidate will get through because they are a very strong candidate. It's fair to say that our mark scheme does allow marks for performance on the BPTC, BVC, whatever you want to brand it as, and that's something to bear in mind. But I've certainly interviewed some very good people who are now tenants who were the best candidate, even though they had yet to do their barification course. I mean, that shows us a real natural talent for advocacy, it has to be said, if you can shine that well in the second round interview in particular, where we get a mock application.
We get quite a few who haven't done their BVC, but fewer, I think, who haven't done their undergrad. I'm thinking aloud. Yeah. Of course, we do give marks for predicted grades, don't we? But again, you'd have to be in your final year, more or less, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, not an absolute bar, but probably need your undergrad under your belt, or at least a pretty good idea what your final predicted grade will be. So I'd have thought that would put you in third year at the very least of uni. Okay. We're asked about whether people need to show a personal link to Bristol or the Western Circuit. Kate, why don't you deal with that? In fact, you're not assessing the written application, so that would be really unfair. Would you rather Natasha dealt with it? Let's ask Natasha.
So I have no links whatsoever to Bristol or the Western Circuit. I didn't do a mini pupillage at St John's either. I did a mini pupillage somewhere in Bristol, but I won't say where. And that was a general common law set just to see the different areas. So no, you don't need any link whatsoever. I think the more important thing is answering the question of why you've chosen to apply to St John's. And for me, it was a case of ultimately I wanted to be at a strong commercial and chancery set. It really didn't matter to me what city that was in. Practically, it really means that you'll be in London, Bristol, Birmingham, Manchester, or Leeds. And so that's where I was looking. I was looking at the top sets in those cities.
Good. What about scholarships? We had a question in advance actually that springs to mind, which was asking really what effect scholarships have. So which the answer is we're interested in merit-based achievements, and we've underlined on our form in recent years that it's merit-based that we're looking at. So you need to explain to us why you got it. And it might just be an award at school or university. It could be anything. It might be an award at some extracurricular thing you do. But the good answers there that get the points are people who explain to us why they got it. What about their performance in something justified this award? Why it shows them to be a good candidate. Whereas you know, some people might have all the awards under the sun, but they might have been given for, you know, reasons we don't know. And so we look for you to explain, really. It doesn't have to be long, but just a bit of an explanation as to why you got it.
Yeah, in the nicest sense, remember that I don't want to sound too selfish and make it all about us. This is about helping you, but you are getting barristers marking these for free in their spare time, in the evenings and weekends. If we get an answer there that says, I got this scholarship, it's awarded to someone who has finished in the top 3 in their year at my university in this subject. You have given us information there, which helps us assess whether that scholarship actually demonstrates achievement. If you just tell us that you got the whatever magic circle award, for all we know, that could be an award which is given for being the most helpful student in your year group in law, which is lovely, but it doesn't tell us much about your abilities as a barrister. So feed us the information. Do not assume that we are going to look up what that award is about, because in fact I can pretty much guarantee that we won't.
I'm delighted to report that the dog's disappeared into a corner over there now, so I can relax slightly.
Actually,
Kate, how did you choose St John's Chambers?
Similar to Natasha, really. So I was looking, I knew by the time that I was applying that I wanted to specialise in family law. So I was looking with a view to chambers that had strengths in that area, and St John's very much stood out. I also went to a pupillage fair, which I think run at a lot of universities, or if not, I think there's a general one as well. And St John's had a stall at that fair. My conversations with the people from St John's at that time were really, really positive. So that was helpful. And then of the few mini pupillages I did, one of them was at St John's, and I really enjoyed it. I got a really nice feel for chambers, and it just solidified really that that was my top choice. So I got very lucky in being offered a pupillage here, because that's what I was hoping for.
This seems like a good time to mention that we keep getting nominated, although admittedly not winning, for Legal Cheek Awards for things like Best Colleague Supportiveness and Best Work-Life Balance. I remember Natasha and I pre-lockdown had a very good jolly to the Shard in London to not win that award. But I guess, you know, that obviously counts for something. It shows that it's not just us saying it, you know, we get recognised for these things. We like to think we're nice. Has anyone else got anything to say about St John's generally? Like, what distinguishes us from other chambers on circuit, we're asked? There's a lot of good chambers on circuit.
yeah, but we're the best. I mean, in essence, there are lots of things that distinguish us, not least where we are in the rankings and how many of our barristers are ranked in the legal directories. The fact that over half of our barristers appear recommended in Legal 500, for example. We are a very friendly, sociable, down-to-earth, but very hard-working set. We are an inclusive and a collaborative and collegiate set. And that isn't always the case in chambers. I can say that, having spoken to good friends who are barristers in all sorts of other chambers who might be enjoying themselves, but maybe very often will make comments and say, "Oh, you lot, you know, you seem to have such a good time." But yeah, it really is a very collegiate space, and it's very supportive, and that does mark us out, and we continue to be sought after as barristers in the Southwest and by firms that are in that area and also in London. So, you know, we do have an unusual profile for a provincial set, for sure, and it also varies from one practice area to another. But yeah, we're the best is the straightforward answer.
Very good sales pitch, I'm convinced. Just before we move on to interviews, I want to deal with this. We're asked how mitigating circumstances are taken into account. Will it just affect our scores in terms of academic achievement, or will it be taken into account more generally? And the answer to this is that it directly applies to academic achievement, i.e. if someone can say, well, I got a 2-2, but here's what happened to me in second or first year of uni, and that's what led to my lower scores, we feed that directly into our assessment of academic achievement. But equally, it's not hard and fast. You know, the process does allow some flexibility. So if, for instance, you had a personal circumstance that explained your decision to want to work at the bar, you know, maybe something happened to a family member or something that drove you into a particular practice area, it might be taken into account in other ways as well. So we're not tying ourselves completely down to only factoring it in at one stage. It really would depend on what the circumstance was and how it applies. So that covers, you know, as much as you can imagine, really. One of the questions we've got is what we're looking for when we're interviewing candidates. So let's move on to interviews. I mean, our first round.
Sorry to jump in, just a question we've had a couple of times is about demonstrating interest in a particular practice area on the form, now that we no longer have a specific box for that. Really, that is up to you. If the thing which brings you to St John's and makes you want to apply to us is our expertise in a particular practice area, then please tell us about that on the application form. And please tell us about any relevant work experience. And also bear in mind that with each bit of work experience and employment, we're also asking you about the experience that you've gained. That is also an opportunity to tailor your application. You can drop little nuggets in there about, you saw this particular case about these issues, and this really made me interested in that area of law. I think that probably deals with those, which lets us shut down a couple more questions on our very good list of questions that we are going to rattle through.
Okay, let's talk about interviews. First round for us, we tend to interview, I said, about 20 people, and we'll have 4 or 5 interview panels made up of 3 people on each panel, and they're mixed. So first time you come for interview, you'll see generally someone from each of our departments sitting there, because that first round, we're taking more of an overview, I suppose, of you. Second round, if you're invited back, it'll be practice group specific. So you'll be sitting in front of 3 people from the practice group that you're applying to. We have advocacy in both rounds, don't we? I remember, well, Viv, you dealt with this most recently. Can you remember what you were asked to do in your first and second round in terms of advocacy?
Yes. So we had it's ingrained. We had the first we had a case, and we just had to prepare it like case analysis, basically. So lots of questions about it. And if I could give advice to anyone applying to St John's, it would be really prep the case and know it inside out. That was, I think, really important for me. And then the second round was similar. I think we had to do a case prep. I think it was possibly some advocacy and type of hearing. I think we had to do
relief from sanction, probably.
I think
like
so. That was it.
Yeah, we had a couple of years of relief from sanctions, which for a family practitioner was just terrifying, because we do not know the civil procedure rules forwards, backwards and sideways.
Don't tell them that.
Yeah.
Oh, but we did our research, don't worry.
Well, these days we've now got practice group specific advocacy exercises as well. So if you're applying for family or applying for PI, you'll be doing an advocacy exercise that's tailored to that area. So that's what happens now. Mm-hmm. We're asked whether we can give examples of a performance that would get you through to second round and a performance that would see you eliminated in first round, so that they can understand the mark scheme better. And I'm sort of looking to everyone to help me with this, but certainly, as Viv just said, the advocacy exercise often is the thing that decides it. It often is the thing that separates people, not always. But you can tell someone who truly understands that case, or truly has got their head around it, who has all the facts at their fingertips, who knows the issues and can list them and bullet point them for us, who knows both sides of the argument. you can see it, can't you, in these interviews.
Yeah, and
And
also
very often,
sorry, I was going to say, and also the people who don't only know the case, but they know it well enough that they can distill it down to a few very short points. At the risk of sounding patronising, this isn't a seminar or a supervision at university where you can talk for 10 or 15 minutes. This is a couple of minutes of you telling us the really key facts, really identifying what the legal issues were, the legal issues which were in dispute, and telling us what the decisions were on that. And if there was a dissenting opinion, knowing the dissenting opinion inside out as well. And less is sometimes more.
Yeah, the other thing that occurs to me is that, everyone's heard now that they're supposed to spend a minute telling people what they've done, and then 5 minutes telling them how they did it, and then 2 minutes at the end talking about what the impact of that was. No matter what our questions are, they're all competency based. They might be about convincing someone of your way of thinking, or working under pressure, or tailoring your communication to a specific audience, whatever it might be. The people that go through that process, who really tell us, this is what I did and this is how I did it, are the people that hoover up the marks, aren't they?
Yeah, it's all about the how.
The how.
People are, and we have this pointed out to us in our interview training, because another point from Rachel's answer of why St John's, it's because we take our recruitment process really seriously, and we have regular training to ensure that we give you the best chance to show your best to us. And we will try and guide you with the STAR technique: situation, task, action, result. But if you reject our offers of help and continue to try and give us loads of background, there isn't much more we can do to help you. If we give you a little prompt and try and get you to move on, and then you start to give us loads of really clear information, concisely, don't forget, about exactly what you were doing and why it worked or why it didn't work, you're helping us see what skills you've got, what skills you know you need to improve, and how you learn from situations, and you will pick up marks. If you spend ages telling us what the background was, you will lose a ton of marks.
Yeah. So for instance, if we talk about processing large amounts of complex information, people often spend quite a while telling us about this really, really complicated thing they dealt with. Whereas actually what we're looking for is the cheats. I used the highlighter, I made lists, I went through and made sure I got rid of any irrelevant pages and then went back through again. Like those kind of cheats that help you with the processing of that information is where the points really are. Natasha, you're asked whether you've got any advice on how to best prepare for a Chancery and commercial pupillage specifically.
I mean, in terms of the actual application process, I don't know if that's much different for my area to any of the other areas. It's really about demonstrating that you have a particular interest in that field and that you will be able to meet the requirements in terms of the intellectual demands that are made on you. I think that's possibly why, coming back to the master's thing again, that is perhaps more of a focus with CNC work, because everyone does tend to be quite concerned about the academics of the individual and whether they'll be able to deal with the kind of cases that we're talking about. I remember doing an interview with someone who on paper actually was academically brilliant, but when it came to the case analysis, really let themselves down, and we were all quite surprised that this happened. But that goes to show that actually it's not just about the academics. You may well be great on paper, but you need to also have the ability to apply it to real life barrister type scenarios. So make sure that you have fully prepared. You might be thinking, well, I've got the grades under my belt, but actually I don't need to do that much prep. I'll just have a quick skim of this case. And it will really come across in an interview. We'll be able to tell almost straight away. If you are lucky enough to get a commercial and chancery pupillage, the one thing that I would say is once you have it, before you start, don't do any work whatsoever beforehand. Just take that time, go on holiday or relax in some other way, because the last thing you want to be doing is going back through all your law books to look through various different sub areas of commercial and chancery, some of which you might not necessarily touch during your 12 months.
To what extent do we think that the different practice groups are looking for the same or different things? I mean, our marks scheme is the same for everyone, isn't it? We effectively boiled down what the kind of things that we thought made a good barrister, And that sort of informed our competency questions, didn't it? So driving resilience, working under pressure, processing large amounts of information, convincing people of your way of thinking, advocacy. I'm trying to think of all the others, but those, it's really the skills that we thought would make a good barrister, and then giving people the chance to give us evidence that they have those skills.
Yeah, there's
Certainly
also an
in the second
element.
round, it becomes more specific, doesn't it? So where do you think the differences lie?
What, between first and second round, you mean?
Well, between practice groups, really, what the different practice groups might be looking for.
Well, it's hard to say, bearing in mind that each of us will only have direct experience. Well, you're probably the exception to this because you go from one panel to another, but each of the rest of us only have experience of our practice team second rounds, and so we only know how it works I would only know how it works for PI and Clin Neg. I do know that in both first and second rounds, but particularly the second round, we're interested in the sort of the candidate's own feedback about how they performed, for example, in the advocacy, because self-awareness is a massive part of this job, and different aspects of self-awareness become more relevant depending on the area that you work in, simply because, you know, in PI, for example, we have to feel that whoever is in our team, any barristers in our team, would be able to have a sensitive conversation with somebody who's had life-changing injuries, if you're in a client conference or something, and the same may well be said in the context of a family case. I don't know, this is something that Julie will be able to speak to much more sensibly than I can. But all of those, you know, the sort of different levels of self-awareness, types of self-awareness, I think, come in as well. And that comes through, I find, in the interviews, in the general discussion. And it's not just through things like somebody's demeanor, the way they speak or the way they respond to things, but it's actually sort of level of analysis and partly why it is that they say that they want to work in the field of PI and Clin Neg, for example. So there are opportunities within the interview to talk about that in more detail. What about family, Julia?
I was just thinking about that, and honestly, I don't think it is as practice group specific as you might imagine, because I know the stereotype is Chancery Commercial is all about academic excellence, but you know, we will mark you down in your family advocacy exercise if you make a mistake on the law, because that's really what academic excellence is about once you get to the interview stage. And if we don't make the advocacy exercises ridiculously legally complex, because we are more interested in your advocacy. But if you get the moderately simple bit of law wrong, and even when we try and help you, you don't notice it is wrong, you will lose a lot of marks. Preparation is your friend, research is your friend, talking it through with someone from your bar course or university and checking if they agree with your legal analysis is jolly sensible if you've got the time. Prepare, and give yourself the best chance.
I'm conscious of time. I think we'll have another 15 minutes or so before I think about maybe wrapping up. Why don't you tell us about your pet peeves when reading pupillage applications? I feel like Natasha will be good on this because she'll be honest.
Not like that I'm the most easily irritated or anything. I think one of the main ones that I see is people who list off a variety of mini pupillages that they've done, sometimes at quite amazing sets, but then don't really say anything about what they did. So they'll say, oh, well, I saw commercial cases, and that will be it. There's nothing there about what they learned from it, what they took away, why that made them more interested in that area or less interested. And so it's really a waste, because when it comes to marking that, how am I supposed to give you any significant marks just because you went to X chambers? Because it doesn't tell me that you actually took anything away from that experience. So things like that, things like not double checking the names of the chambers that you've put on the application, sending in an application that's clearly for a practice area that we don't do.
See, I personally quite like all that stuff because it's really hard whittling it down. And that's just a really easy way of like getting rid of one, isn't it? But really important.
One of my pet peeves when we are reading applications has got to be the individual who is probably lacking in the sort of self-awareness I was talking about earlier and writes as though they are basically God's gift to the law and oversells what they've done, and you've got to remember, we analyze evidence and cross-examine people for a living, so we read large amounts of information very quickly, and take a lot of information in as we do it, and you can spot an inauthentic application a mile off. And just as I find it's a pet peeve for someone to be inauthentic, it's really great when you see someone, you read an application where somebody is being, or you get a sense of authenticity, where they're honestly telling you, oh really, this is why I'm interested in this happened and it made me feel like that, it made me think, it made me go down this route, or the sort of thing that Ben was talking about earlier, where there might have been something that happened to someone in your family and that led you down a particular path in terms of wanting to pursue an area of law, or what you've learned from a mini pupillage, the sort of thing that Natasha was talking about, where someone's really thought about what they've learned and reflected on it and has built on it. That I'd turn it around rather than say they're not pet peeves, but they're the sorts of things I love to read, and it feels great because when we're reading these things, as Julia says, we're all busy and tired and fitting it in around everything else. Actually, what we're doing is we're rooting for you as we're reading it. We want you to do well. We really do. And when you're being authentic, and when you're addressing the issues, and when you're showing a bit of yourself, and writing well, and you've carefully drafted what you've sent to us, and that includes things like typos and grammatical errors and things, but actually, the reality is we just want you to do well, and don't give us reasons to throw your application in the reject pile. That's all I'm saying.
Two quick pet peeves from me. Lots of sloppy typos. Sure, everyone occasionally mishits a key and doesn't notice one typo, but if it's littered with typos, that will make us worry that your written work, were you to be a pupil at St John's, would be of poor quality. And second, using complicated words because you think that's what barristers do. No, the best advocacy is simple and to the point. Don't regurgitate the thesaurus into your application form. The worst of all is if you use a complicated word which you think is a synonym of the simple word you were comfortable with, and you've misused it, because then we can tell that you're using language you don't really understand for no reason. There you go. I'll shut up now.
The cat's here now. It's like a zoo. I'm interested to talk about pupillage, actually. So can you give us an idea, Kate, maybe you first, of the kind of things you watched and did in first six, and then the kind of hearings you did and work you did in second six?
Yeah, so first six mainly for me involved a lot of court time. So as a family barrister, a lot of the work you'll do will be in the actual court building. So I mainly shadowed my supervisors in those first 6 months. So that involved a lot of quite complicated cases with a lot of different issues within different areas of family law. So it was across matrimonial finance law, and then public and private children cases as well. In the run up to my second six, that then transitioned into shadowing more junior members of the team, because that was really helpful in me getting a sense of the kind of cases that I would be starting off with. So I was able to then kind of get my head around what I would need to do to prepare, and kind of doing a simulation of that and then getting that feedback from junior members. And then in second six, it started off, the first few weeks, because it was that tricky time for me, were fairly quiet. But then as soon as I was away, it kind of escalated to a very busy practice quite swiftly. So about maybe 3, 4, up to 5 cases a week in court. For me, that's court via Teams like we're doing now most of the time, although I have been to some court buildings across the Southwest, which has been exciting, and I get to venture out into the world. But yeah, so starting off kind of shorter hearings, and I think hearings to start with, I think as I went on, kind of the issues build, and there's been a few times now where issues aren't new to me anymore, and I'm more familiar with the kind of the processes and the law because I've done it before. So certainly I think a lot of the groundwork in Second Six, you'll be spending a lot of time kind of getting your head around things that are unfamiliar, but then you build upon the knowledge and you're constantly expanding that knowledge. And I guess that continues for the rest of your practice because there's always going to be new and more complicated cases to get next, which keeps things interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned remote working. I can't remember the last time I was in a court building, frankly. So much of it's by video and phone now, isn't it? So much. And it seems like a good time to mention that our pupils get shiny new iPad Pros and a nice Apple Pen and stuff like that when they join. Don't you, Viv? Not in my day, not in my day. Okay, I mean, we've got a couple of questions specific to PI, Rachel. So why don't you talk about the junior end of PI and what they do, but also tied into that, a question about the law reform, lots more low value work, much less that's well funded, and what we're going to do, what we do to manage that.
Yeah, sure. The second is harder to answer because there's so many different elements to it, but looking at, and this is the trouble, it disappears into the next bit, doesn't it, when it's being answered. Let me just see if I can find what the question was that's got my name in it.
It says, are you able to talk about some of the work that a pupil in PI and Clin Neg would do, and are there any specific cases that you can mention, please?
Sure, thanks, Ben. Yes, so there's a separation between first and second six. Obviously in second six, it's where you have your own cases, you're doing work in your own right, as well as doing work for other people as a pupil in a similar way that you might have done in the first six. As far as different areas of work across both first and second six are concerned, as a personal injury and clinical negligence pupil, you would probably be looking at your supervisor's range of work within the first 3 months, and then it broadens out after that, generally speaking. So you'll be covering things like employer's liability, occupiers liability, matters, public liability. You'd be dealing with road traffic accident claims, some of which will involve credit hire, various vehicle damage elements and all the rest of it. You might be dealing with various different aspects of clinical negligence that could be very complicated. You could be dealing with a laparoscopic cholecystectomy one day and not an improperly obturated root canal treatment on another day. I mean, there's a whole range in clinical negligence as well. You would be doing statements of case, so you'd be doing defences, you'd be doing particulars of claim, you'd be drafting schedules and counter schedules of losses. You would be doing advices on quantum, on liability, on prospects, on evidence, on procedural issues, advices potentially on costs matters, personal injury costs. You might be doing an advice relating to an interim application, whether or not it's worth applying for relief from sanctions on something. It's a really lovely wide range of areas that you would get to look at in personal injury. In your second six, you would be doing things like telephone, video, and in-person hearings, interim applications. I don't know if interim applications means anything to you guys. I mean, they only start to make sense when you start to look at the civil procedure rules, I think. Probably.
Generally simpler stuff. Generally
simpler, shorter stuff.
Exactly.
So it could be anything from a half-hour stage 3 hearing or 20-minute stage 3 hearing, which is about the amount of compensation when liability has already been admitted, or it could be a small claims trial, or it could be a low value fast track trial.
But we're trying to break our pupils in gently, you know, give everyone the chance to push themselves, but also not terrify them on day one. And thankfully, you know, we've got a lot of experience, a lot of good staff, you know, clerking staff and admin staff and so on. You've got a lot of experience helping pupils develop their practices. So they've got a really good handle of that, frankly. You can trust them to do that, you know, bit of carrot, bit of stick, terrify you a bit and push you a bit, but not too much.
And everyone in the
goes on
team,
your whole career.
yeah, and everyone in the team supports you. It's not unusual for us to get text messages or phone calls at the weekends or sometimes in the evenings from pupils just wondering about certain things that they're dealing with in the following week or the next day or whatever. And it's very much a set that where that's just the norm and people are really happy to help out. I mean, that's something that I suspect both Viv and Kate will be able to say more about now, but it wasn't that long ago that I was in my own pupillage, and I do remember that being amazed, being a bit blown away actually as to how generous people were with their time and their brain space.
I mean, we're asked whether people
when
get an opportunity to work on their own cases or whether they're shadowing supervisors for the year, and the answer is you do loads of your own cases in Second Six, loads of them. Has Viv frozen? Have I frozen?
Viv is frozen.
Viv was frozen, and she was just about to say something profound. We'd better step on it, hadn't we? So I can see we've got 6 questions, so we might have to quick fire rattle through those.
We're asked about whether we check scholarships to make sure they're authentic. I suppose the answer to that is we interrogate them to a point. You know, we like to think we've got a good censor for BS. We don't actually contact the institutions. I think it's fair to say we don't really do that. Maybe we will start doing that this year. You know, obviously don't lie in your application. I'm not suggesting that person was going to. And we're asked about whether work experience and internships with law firms outside of the UK are as valuable as many pupillages in the UK. It's quite difficult to answer that because, again, you sort of know it and you see it. It depends on what it is, its relevance. There's no reason at all why it shouldn't be as valuable. I think the answer before about doing a handful of minis in the kind of areas that you're interested in was a good one. How often do we deal with ethical issues, and can you discuss these issues with colleagues? Anyone got a good story about that? What ethical issues have you dealt with?
Had a situation where I had to go to a mediation, knowing that there was a conflict or potential conflict between my group of clients, and so potentially would have to pull the plug on the whole mediation, which was very awkward. But it was fine in the sense that I could explain to them what the conflict was, and they were happy to sign off on me continuing to act. But otherwise, I've been pulling the plug on a mediation that everyone spent quite a few thousand people to attend. So that was quite awkward. There's a panicked phone call with one of my pupil supervisors. So it happens more often than you would like insofar as ethical issues are concerned, but there is always someone in chambers that you can speak to.
Yeah, I mean, the only time you wouldn't be able to speak to someone in chambers is if that person is involved on the other side of the case, which does happen. You'll be against people from inside your own chambers. You obviously can't tip them off that you've got an ethical issue because that raises a whole other ethical issue of its own. But yeah, generally we're there for each other, and you're never too experienced to not need a phone a friend. I may have got the negatives wrong there. You can tell it's been a long day.
We were asked about what's the maximum time you've spent on a case? I mean, years and years and years. I had a case settle this afternoon, in fact, that had been going on for, I don't know, 5 years or something, which was great. Very nice client, really, really deserving, but also I spent a lot of time on it, and we don't get paid generally to the end of cases. So that was also quite nice for me, a few weeks short of Christmas and a new tax bill.
And it depends on when you mean when you count as the start of the case. So if it's from the cause of action, that can be many years. I mean, I was second junior in a case for one of our silks last year, and it was from an accident in 2011, and it didn't get settled until 2021. So that's 10 years. I'm dealing with one at the moment that's been rumbling on for 3.5 years just in litigation, and the actual problem was in the cause of action was 2016, so like about 5 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
In terms
Yeah,
of
you're
the
right.
question, in terms of how do we assess ethics and ethical knowledge in the application process, as you've seen from our form, we don't have a specific question about your ethical knowledge, but the bottom line is that if you fail ethics, you're in a great deal of trouble with your BPTC qualification. We will sometimes put a cheeky little ethical point in your problem question at second round, just to see how you deal with it. We won't necessarily put a big red flag by it saying, guys, this is the ethical issue. But yeah, just keep on your toes. Try and spot everything, and then you'll be fine.
What else? Got 3 questions here. We'll just finish off with these 3, and then I think we will wrap up, just because it's been quite a long session, and I know everyone's got, well, I was going to say work to do, but really it's Succession to watch for me.
Aren't you lucky?
So this person works in mental health care and wants to work in family children law. They want to work in healthcare professional standards and PI appeals. Presumably that's personal injury. What would PI be in that context? Anyway, they're asking whether overlapping work post-qualifying would be possible. I see. So this person wants to work in family primarily, but has an interest in PI.
I mean, I suppose the main overlap area in family is going to be court of protection work,
yes.
COP. Now that will come up both in a child context, particularly if you've got a child over the age of 16. You may well need to have a COP overlap with any care proceedings or private law proceedings relating to that child, but then also you get COP work for adults as well. That's dealt with by both our Chancery team and our family team at St John's. In terms of mental health, we don't, as far as I don't think there's anyone in Chambers who does mental health tribunal work. That really is quite a niche area of practice. And so if that area, representing people at mental health tribunals or sitting on mental health tribunals is something you're interested in, I have to be honest that we're not going to be the set that's the perfect fit for you.
Definitely there are people who do have a bit of a crossover, don't they? People's practices are sort of developing all kinds of strange directions. Richard Stead does construction and personal injury. Christopher Sharp, QC, is a QC in personal injury and family somehow. So there's no bar to that. It's our pupillage really that is specialist, because we think that's the best way of doing it.
Yeah, I've got to admit, sorry. Carry on.
There's an awful lot of overlap in the skills and so on that you need, certainly, and you'll learn during pupillage. And there's no reason at all why, if you had a particular burning desire to branch out into other practice areas, there's no real reason why you couldn't. It would just be a discussion you'd have with your clerk and maybe your pupil supervisor during pupillage, so you could sort of get experience in those directions as time went on.
I think it's fair to say that cross-dressing, as we used to call it, is harder than it used to be, because even in the time I've been at the bar, the sheer volume of case law which comes out and the length of each decision to read, digest and get on top of is so much more than it used to be. You know, case reports being more than 20 or 30 pages used to be the exception. It's now the norm. So staying on top of several areas of law in very great detail, you're setting yourself a high bar there. Perhaps I'm lazier than I realise that I can't even begin to contemplate that.
One thing to say actually on the court of protection thing is that there is also a PI overlap, which is where we're dealing with things like deprivation of liberty matters and welfare, various welfare as well. And it's something that at the moment is not a major area of practice for us, but it's something that we're developing.
Yeah, we get deprivation of liberty a lot in children work, particularly where you've got the most troubled children who are having to be kept inside, supervised past an age at which that will be normal. So yeah, DOLS is a big practice area for us.
And handling large sums of money as well when
Yeah.
clients get their awards. Final question. Do we get an opportunity to learn how to conduct ADR in pupillage? It may become a new mandatory feature in litigation. That's on the rise, I think, because I think as of next year, there's a compulsory negotiation course in pupillage, as there is right now with advocacy and practice management. I think negotiation is coming in as a compulsory course, so you will do it during pupillage. We have loads of mediators in chambers, so you would certainly be learning by osmosis, at least, by going along to mediations with someone at some point. If it was an interest of yours in particular, if you mentioned it to us, then we'd have plenty of people that you could follow to do that kind of thing. Just before we go, I'm going to say thanks to everyone. Viv has prompted me to mention a few things that we think we do well. Feedback. We always give feedback after interviews. Detailed written feedback after first round interviews, verbal feedback after second round interviews. It takes time, but we think it's really important and we like to do it. We don't give feedback after written applications just because it would be crazy levels of admin. We just haven't got the time, unfortunately. What else do we do well? Welfare. As well as winning all these awards, or nearly winning these awards from Legal Cheek, we have in place a buddy system. So all our pupils get allocated a junior member of chambers to act as their buddy. So they can go to them for a coffee with all the stuff they don't want to talk to about their pupil supervisor. People can use them or not, however much as they want to, but generally people seem to think that's really, really valuable. We also have quarterly review meetings with pupils, their supervisors, and an outside member, usually someone from the pupillage committee, where the pupil gets a chance to talk about their progress to date, what they want to do for the next few months. And crucially, part of that session is without the supervisor there. So an opportunity, again, for any issues that need ironing out that the pupil doesn't want to raise with their supervisor, but wants to raise with someone else, a friendly face. We're constantly trying to think of new ways to improve our pupils' welfare. And so, as Viv prompted me, these things we should mention. And I'm going to mention the iPad again, because I think that's really cool. Someone asked for clarification, but frankly, these days, the truth is we work so much remotely now. I rarely get anything in hard copy paper form. It's all downloaded from Dropbox. It all goes directly onto your iPad. So that really is a valuable bonus. I can't think of anything else. I'm sure there's other stuff, but I'm conscious it's been a really long evening already. So I want to thank you all for your time. All of you who've attended, especially you five, you're great. And in the background, Sarah and Victoria, who you can't see on screen, but this really wouldn't be happening without them, because none of us can make it work without them. So thank you very much. And I'm going to say good night.
And good luck.
And good luck.
Yeah, good luck, and be authentic and go for it.